Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Rory Sutherland. Rory Sutherland is an award-winning advertisement chief. He was educated at Christ's College. He spent a probationary year, it says here, teaching classics at a grammar school, and then he went and joined Ogilvy and Mather. He was fired from there, from the planning department, but then joined the agency's creative department as a junior copywriter and worked with, amongst others, the fledgling Microsoft company. He made his way up the hierarchy. He's now vice chairman of the overall Ogilvy Group and was recently elected president of the IPA. He writes a Wikiman column at The Spectator. He blogs and tweets. Ladies and gentlemen, Rory Sutherland.
Thanks very much. We're always a little uncomfortable, I think, with anything new, particularly when we hit a certain age point. There's a brilliant private eye cartoon from about 15 years ago which actually illustrates this perfectly, and actually illustrates Roger's point, which just shows a small boy staring into the flames of a fire outside a cave with his grumpy father standing over him and remarking, when I was a boy we had to make our own entertainment. Douglas Adams, who would be a worthy addition to this debate today, made a wonderful observation that actually, for any individual, technologies and inventions divide into three. There are those that are invented before you're about 10, which aren't technology at all, they're just infrastructure. None of us none of us actually go, oh shit, the bloody hot water's gone, goddamn technology, okay? My children, who are now 10, when I first took them away to a house in the country for a weekend, they turned on the computer and their first reaction was, the internet's broken. It had never occurred to them that actually there was a place without Wi-Fi. Then you have those things which are interesting, which are those things which are invented between the age of about 10 and about 35. And those are absolutely magical, wonderful, glorious things, absolutely astounding. I'm going to actually rewrite my life around these things. Can't imagine how we ever lived without them. And then there are the third group of things, which are the things that are invented after you're about 45, which are utterly ridiculous. Can't imagine what anybody wants with this. And what an absolutely stupid idea. And this rule applies no matter who you are. I must admit, it's tragic. I am 45, and I've reached exactly that point with 3D television. Having bought absolutely everything that Sky could offer me up to that point, I look at 3D television and go, but why? It reminds me, interestingly, of a comment on modernity made by Fritz Lang, the great cinema director, who said of CinemaScope, what on earth do you want that for, unless you're trying to show a snake or a funeral? Widescreen, in its day, was widely attacked by people. And there's a problem I think we face here, which is that, first of all, I'm making this case at a festival, which is an occasion where everybody goes away for 3 days to try and regain a kind of prelapsarian paradise existence in a tent. Just a few caveats to this. These events, I notice, always take place in the summer. The November festivals never seem to do particularly well. And everybody remembers to pack both analgesics and a mobile phone. So the prelapsarian existence is a little bit of, but if you phoned your dad, he could end it all. That's the first thing to remember. Everybody hates a tourist. The second thing, but the vital question to ask is actually, you're not wrong. In seeking to actually enjoy a life with actually less technology, less noise, etc., there's nothing wrong with this. One of the great things that free market capitalism should recognise is that actually subjective tastes matter. This was the great problem with Marxism. It imposed technology on people whether they wanted it or not. The 1970s, bizarrely, thought the highest form of technological achievement was spending £3 billion of poor people's money so that Princess Margaret could get to Barbados 4 hours earlier, which was the principal role of Concorde, as far as I could see. The actual consumer role was practically negligible. The obsession with speed is a communist one. It's all about the aggrandizement of the state, not the aggrandizement or the improvement of the individual. And the highest form, of course, of that Marxist achievement was actually putting a dog into space and leaving it there to die. Which I think shows your ideal of technology in its most peculiar light. But there's only one vital question to ask. Nothing wrong with disliking technology. The only question we've got to ask is, are we actually fair in our judgment of it? What are our biases? When we hear the word technology and we vote on this motion, what are the biases that are at work that may be affecting the way we think? And I think there's one vital thing to understand, which is that any successful technology succeeds by ceasing to be a technology. It becomes something we just grow up with. And when we hear the word technology, we automatically think of ideas which are in the process of being digested, and which are giving rise to some pain. Cars were a technology in about 1910. In the Roman era, sewage and a water supply was a technology. The really, really successful, useful ones cease to be thought of as technology. And when we hear the word technology, our attention is disproportionately brought to bear on those things that are difficult. The problems you mentioned, Harry, are largely problems of etiquette, which with email will be solved, either by people ceasing to use email or by people developing the etiquette that's required. This happened in the early days of the telephone. Alexander Graham Bell's advice, which I would actually like to readopt, was that the correct way to answer the telephone was with a jaunty ahoy. For a long time, interestingly, any Czechs here, bizarrely, his advice in the Czech Republic stuck. If you ring a random number in Prague this evening, your phone call will be answered with ahoy. I kind of like that. But the fact is, those things will iron themselves out. And when we think of technology, the danger is that all our focus is on those things that we're currently wrestling with and not with the things we've successfully digested. So the vital question we've got to ask is, Britain, in a country, where should we pitch our affection for technology? And my concern is not that we should become an absolutely... I think there have been periods of British history in the 1970s. Anybody watch on BBC 4 Telly Savalas Looks at Birmingham? An extraordinary documentary from the 1970s. That, I think, was a period where optimism about the new, particularly modern architecture and roads, just reached an insane kind of height. I'd argue present-day China. I'd also say of present-day China, where 8 out of the 9 Politburo are actually engineering graduates, that their idea of progress, which is, as far as I can see from the air, consists of creating a giant version of Akron, Ohio on a massive scale, doesn't seem to be absolutely brilliant. You know, again, high-speed trains and big megaplexes form a large part of this sort of state-sponsored technology. But at the same time, all I want to make sure of is that we also live in a country which contemplates nuclear power as an alternative to windmills. France seems to actually operate 85% of its electrical devices on about 50 nuclear power stations. Is this a completely insane idea for the UK? And what I don't want to develop here is a culture which is the opposite of the Chinese culture, which is sceptical to technology in all but its most uncontroversial and minimalistic forms. And we can get the balance right. It's very important that Britain does, because we're really rather good at it. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, gentlemen. Your witness.
Yes, Rory, that was a brilliant speech. I think your point about ageing is incredibly powerful. Being even older than you, I have a terrible feeling that. But at least I was thinking, gosh, Rory is absolutely right. That's really. Then I suddenly thought, well, actually, there are all these young people here, and an awful lot of them are actually very suspicious about some of these new technologies. So it isn't just a question about ageing. I know people roughly your age whose children are turning against these technologies. So don't you think that rather goes against your point that it's simply a matter of just being an old fart or a fuddy-duddy or whatever?
I think it's actually very good that people actually can use technology they want and reject those technologies they don't. I think that sort of top-down technology which you see, which is particularly characterised by sort of grand projects of sort of state-sponsored activity, often benefit the consumer very little. In fact, in Marx, one of the problems that Marxism had is it measured success by the production of locomotives, not by the fact that any trains were actually running. And so you could actually deem yourself a successful economy simply by manufacturing useless metal things. Now, I'm very pleased that actually, this actually technology is used to deliver human benefits at an individual level. I'm totally happy for people as part of that to reject certain forms of technology, as a good winemaker will, after all. The only vital thing is that when we hear the word, we don't react viscerally, as, for example, nuclear power. If it had been called anything other than nuclear power, the actual public reaction to it would have been completely different.
Well, perhaps also if governments and nuclear industries hadn't been so incredibly dishonest and opaque throughout the world in covering up the results of accidents.
Absolutely fair.
Do you accept that the 250 million Chinese people who've been lifted out of poverty over the past 5 years would disagree with your denigration of Chinese progress?
No, I think the Chinese economy is making progress. It's also a relatively easy thing to do because it involves technology transfer.
So basically,
it isn't actually innovation.
What you're in favour of is Western middle class use of technology, which allows you to play around with it, to have a certain kind of TV, to reject it for a weekend at a conference like this. But you're not really in favour of millions upon millions of people being lifted out of poverty by old technologies, which you consider rather brutalist. Is that what?
No, it's simply the fact that actually we've got to find something to do with our money, and actually old technologies have a diminishing marginal utility. I don't want 4 cars, nor do I want a car that goes 200 miles an hour.
But if we hadn't gone through what China's going through now, which we went through in the Victorian era, you wouldn't have the choices that you're having.
No.
So if we hadn't gone through the old technological stuff, which was dirty and polluting and horrible and filthy, and it made people sick, you wouldn't have the luxury we're all having now, sitting in this lovely room, tweeting and texting. Why shouldn't China also go through the old technological revolution without criticisms from the West about them doing it the wrong way?
There's an unanswered question there, which is Indians frequently and possibly wrongly believe it's possible to go to the 3rd stage of industrial development without going through the 2nd one. And that is widely posited in India. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
But it's true. It's true in Africa, where they've completely leapt over the old telegraph system and just adopted mobile phones.
Yeah, with great success and great economic contributions there. Yeah.
Very good, ladies and gentlemen. Please thank our panelists.